afternoon, everybody. I call to order this hearing of the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on Immigration, Citizenship, and Border Safety. I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon, and we expect in a few minutes that we'll be joined by Ranking Member Senator Cornyn. And I wanted to thank him and his team once again, his staff, for working in such close partnership with my office to make this hearing possible. As you've seen on our agenda, the theme of this hearing is strengthening our workforce and economy through higher education and immigration. And we will be discussing specifically the impact of immigration and higher education on America's workforce and our economy. And I'd like to emphasize that the hearing couldn't come at a more timely moment. Tomorrow marks the 10-year anniversary of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, also known as DACA. Now, DACA has helped hundreds of thousands of young immigrants pursue their dreams, their American dreams, while contributing to their communities and strengthening our economy. But from day one, DACA was never intended as a permanent solution, and it has left hundreds of thousands of young people and their families in limbo. We urgently need to expand DACA and codify permanent protections for dreamers into federal law. As families across America know all too well, we're also facing historic levels of inflation. As families are feeling the impact of higher prices at the gas pump, at the grocery store, rising costs for rent and medical care, I can't help but listen to business leaders and economists who agree that a significant contributor to inflation is America's labor shortage. We simply don't have the workforce needed to meet the demands of our growing economy. And that demand will continue to grow in the coming decade, especially in the STEM fields of science, technology, engineering, and math. In order to maintain a healthy and competitive workforce, we must both foster the talent of young Americans and do more to attract and retain the best and brightest minds from around the world. And that begins with addressing immigration policy for college and university students. Now, the United States has long been a global leader in higher education. Students from around the world dream of coming to the United States to pursue advanced degrees. Many hope not just to find work here, but to start their own companies following graduation. The reality is, though, that too many are turned away from that dream by restrictive immigration policies that limit their time and options in the United States. For instance, under current law, international students who want to secure a student visa must prove that they have no intention of staying in the United States after they graduate. That policy needlessly turns away potential students who want the chance to give back by contributing to the economy in the place where they've earned their degrees. It also shuts out refugee students who have no home to return to. At colleges and universities across our country, enrollment of international students is falling. Potential international students are increasingly questioning whether it is worth it to come and study in the United States if there's no path for them to stay and to work after graduation. Meanwhile, other countries who compete with us for economic and political leadership are making it more attractive for international students to come to their universities and stay after graduation. They're more than eager to recruit the students who are no longer coming to the United States. And why wouldn't they be? We've spent a lot of time in this Congress talking about U.S. competition policy. Immigration and education have been key elements of America's competitive edge. And we are now losing that edge by failing to update our immigration laws. We're also leaving behind hundreds of thousands of immigrant students, both documented and undocumented, who are already home in the United States, yet can't pursue the same opportunities as their peers who are citizens. Again, tomorrow is the 10-year anniversary of DACA, a vital program that has enabled many of these young people to study, to work, and to make their lives here in the United States. People like Dr. Dalia Larios, who will be joining us today as a witness. Now, DACA enabled her to achieve her dream of attending medical school, and today she cares for cancer patients as a resident in the Harvard Radiation Oncology program. But she and hundreds of thousands of other DACA recipients still face roadblocks and uncertainty based on their immigration status. They live in constant fear of DACA ending. And because of congressional inaction and the numerous legal challenges to DACA, the majority of today's undocumented high school graduates can't even benefit from DACA's protections. That means no authorization to hold a job or chance to get a driver's license. It means potentially being shut out of college or being ineligible for financial aid. When promising students like Dr. Larios are pushed into the shadows, we all lose. Congress must pass a legislative solution for dreamers so more students can earn their degrees and join our workforce. Our economy needs the talents and passion of immigrant youth. That's why immigration reform in higher education is a bipartisan issue and a top priority for America's business community. I'm committed to finding a path forward, and I look forward to hearing from today's witnesses and taking action for immigrant students. Now I'd like to acknowledge and turn to Ranking Member Cornyn for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for running a little late, but thank you for putting this hearing together. I've long been a supporter of employment-based immigration. When Congress first divided immigration into two tracks, family and employment, this committee described employment-based immigration as a step in equalizing access to immigrant visas and opening new opportunities for immigrants without family connections in the United States. That's still true today. It doesn't matter where you're from or where you live. If you have skills that can contribute to our economy and our country, our employment-based immigration program provides a path for you to come to the United States legally. Unfortunately, our demand for labor across sectors and skill levels outpaces supply, a problem that's only been made worse by the pandemic. And our immigration system is struggling to keep pace. Per-country caps have artificially limited access to employment-based visas for prospective immigrants from countries like India, preventing workers who want to contribute to our economy from being able to do so. And our existing guest worker programs need to be updated to meet today's challenges, including the need for year-round labor in the ag sector and the sheer demand for temporary non-agricultural workers like landscaping, forestry, and seafood production. Today's hearing is focused on one potential source of highly trained workers who can contribute to our economy, individuals who come to study at our universities and other educational institutions on an F, J, and M visa. According to U.S. Customs, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, international students pursued more than 1.1 million degrees in the United States in 2021. For every year, more than 200,000 new highly skilled students temporarily join our workforce through the optional practical training program, outstripping the number of permanent positions available to them when they finish this program. I look forward to hearing about the proposals that would allow us to harness these students' skills in the longer term. And as we consider more pathways for high-skilled immigrants to come to the United States, we should not forget our need for guest workers who may not hold university degrees, but are important to our economy. I look forward to working with my colleagues to develop balanced, bipartisan policies to update our immigration system and meet the needs of today's economy across all sectors. If I can, Mr. Chairman, tomorrow marks the 10th anniversary of the memorandum that created the DACA program. I've long advocated for a pathway for our DACA recipients. They came to the United States at an early age through no fault of their own, and they know no country other than the United States. Like Dalio Larios, who we were fortunate to have with us today, they've made important contributions to our society. Unfortunately, the program was built on shaky legal grounds, which has resulted in 10 years of litigation, which has not yet even concluded. The Immigration and Nationality Act sets forth a comprehensive statutory scheme for allocating legal statuses. The DACA population simply is not covered under the statutory framework, and the statute doesn't even include a category for them. The Obama administration knew this when it created the program, but it simply chose to ignore the law and to circumvent the legislative process, which President Obama said time and time again he did not have the authority to do. But then he did act unilaterally, thus giving rise to the 10 years of litigation and the uncertainty that DACA recipients currently are experiencing. Last year, Senator Tillis and I asked Chairman Durbin to schedule a markup of a bill to provide permanent legal status to DACA recipients. We proposed the committee consider the bill through an open amendment process so other senators could offer reasonable amendments, which we expected would most likely include proposals related to border security, interior enforcement, and employment verification programs. That process in the committee would have allowed us to develop a bipartisan package that might have had an opportunity to gain the support necessary to pass on the Senate floor. Unfortunately, that request was declined. In the meantime, the DACA case continues to wind its way through the courts, bringing us closer to the day when the program is likely finally and completely struck down. Meanwhile, the Department of Homeland Security has failed to meaningfully respond to the historically high levels of illegal immigration across our southern border. In April 2022, U.S. Customs and Border Protection encountered more than 234,000 migrants along the southern border, the highest monthly total since President Biden took office. In other words, the problem's getting worse and not better. I've shared with Chairman Durbin and Chair of the subcommittee, Padilla, and anybody else who will listen, that as long as this chaos and humanitarian disaster remains at the border, it's very hard, if not impossible, for us to address other immigration-related issues. Migrants continue to place themselves in the hands of transnational criminal organizations that make dangerous journeys to the southern border. By quickly releasing the migrants into the interior instead of adjudicating their asylum claims, the Department of Homeland Security only continues to send the message to migrants who merely seek to improve their economic situation that this is a viable pathway to the United States. Today, we're talking about strengthening our economy and workforce through immigration, but the irony is that migrants who unlawfully cross the border and eventually receive a final order of removal will, by law, be ineligible to participate in our guest worker program. We need to take action to update our asylum laws and deter would-be migrants from trying to enter the United States this way. Last year, Senator Sinema and I introduced the Bipartisan Border Solutions Act, a balanced, bipartisan, bicameral bill that would create a fair and efficient process to adjudicate asylum claims. Migrants with valid claims would receive their green card sooner, and migrants who did not qualify for asylum would receive the legal certainty they need to move forward with their lives. In addition to the Bipartisan Border Solutions Act, this committee needs to give the Department of Homeland Security the tools it needs to effectively use existing legal authorities, including expedited removal. Our current lack of detention capacity has led to migrants being released into the interior instead of being placed into expedited removal proceedings. If the high levels of illegal immigration continue, we can expect to have more people living in the shadows in the future, with only the transnational criminal organizations benefiting from this arrangement. Mr. Chairman, continuing to ignore the crisis on the southern border, as the Biden administration has chosen to do, is only making it harder for us to build the support we need to grow our employment-based immigration system and our economy. Thank you for your patience and your indulgence.
Thank you, Senator Cornyn. I'll now turn to the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator Durbin, the floor is yours.
Senator Padilla, thank you for holding this important hearing on an issue of importance to our nation and important to me personally. I didn't know that this would be a major endeavor in my Senate career, but it has become one. It was 21 years ago in this room that I first introduced the DREAM Act, bipartisan legislation to give undocumented immigrants who grew up in this country a chance to become citizens. 21 years. The obvious answer is, Durbin, you're supposed to be a hotshot legislator. What's going on? When are you going to pass this bill? Well, we called it on the floor 5 times. We had a majority vote every single time, but we couldn't break the filibuster, 60-vote requirement. So we keep trying, and I'm going to continue to. 11 years ago, I chaired the first ever Senate hearing on the DREAM Act in this room. We've never been able to get it to the president's desk, but we're not giving up. Today, as you've heard, is the 10th anniversary of President Obama's announcement of DACA. He announced the DACA program after I sent a letter first with Senator Lugar, a year later with 21 other senators urging him to do that. It's been a dramatic change in the lives of hundreds of thousands of young people across America, and you'll hear from some of them today. But the question now, obviously, is what are we going to do to fix the problem? The 4 of us, as you see up here, Senator Tillis, Senator Cornyn, Senator Padilla, and I have met repeatedly to try to work out what Senator Cornyn just described. Is there some way to bring order to the southern border? We are being overwhelmed by the number of people who are showing up. Many of them are asking for asylum status, and there's a process you go through, which includes a hearing and may even include an immigration court. And it takes a period of time, and what to do with someone who's in the middle of that process while they're waiting for their day in court. That's one of the elements we have to deal with. I think the basics we all kind of agree on, at least I do, think it's pretty obvious. Number one is we need an orderly process at the border. It can't just be overwhelm us and then write the rules from that point forward. Secondly, we should never allow any dangerous person in this country who wants in this country or anyone to stay in this country who's a danger to us. Security of America is number one priority. And number 3 is we cannot accept everyone who wants to come to America today. There has to be a process where we bring them in. There are 2 or 3 ways to do it, and some of them are legal, some are not. The legal process, asylum I mentioned earlier, and another one is work visas. Well, are we at a point in American history where we need workers? We hear it every day. By the millions, people are asking for more workers. So under the Trump administration, we usually have 1 million legal immigrants a year. That figure was cut down to 250,000. So at the end of the 4 years of President Trump, we were net lost 3 million immigrants to this country. That's part of the workforce that's not there. And we hear it from every business we talk to, the restaurants, the hotels, the people who own the orchards and the fields where the crops are grown. They desperately need workers. We ought to have a process, and I think we can agree on it, for people to come and work legally in this country with certain restrictions on how long they can stay and what their situation is. But if that process were in place, I think we might have fewer showing up in mob scenes at the border. I hope we can reach that point. I want to salute the chairman of the subcommittee for bringing this issue before us. And here's what I'd like to say in closing. It was 2 months or so ago that we met, 3 months maybe, in the same committee and talked about the prospect of sitting down and trying to reach a point where we could bring all these bills to the floor. We're going to be returning around July the 11th from our 4th of July break. If Senators Tillis and Cornyn are finished with their current project by then, I hope they are, I hope we can make immigration their next project. We need the kind of bipartisanship we're seeing on the issue of gun safety when it comes to the issue of immigration. We're lucky to have a number of senators on this subcommittee who have proven that they are willing to step up and speak up for solving problems. Let's solve immigration next. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the attendance of other members of the subcommittee. What I'd like to do next is to lay out the mechanics for today's hearing. I will soon introduce and swear in today's witnesses. They will each have 5 minutes to make their opening remarks. We will then begin our first round of questions, and each senator will have 5 minutes. I ask that we each try to stay within our allotted time. And I will begin introductions
Mr.
with
Chairman.
Mr.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I have I'm ranking member on Personnel Subcommittee, and I have a markup, and I may not be able to make it back in time for questions, but I want to thank you for the work, and Senator Durbin, Senator Cornyn, our discussions, and want to associate myself with the comments of Senator Cornyn and Senator Durbin. I think it's time to get something done.
Thank you, Senator Tillis. Let me begin next by introducing our first witness, Mr. Burrola. Bernard Burrola is Vice President for International Community and Economic Engagement at the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, North America's oldest higher education association. In his role, Mr. Burrola works to strengthen university members' internationalization efforts, community development initiatives, and the economic impact of over 230 premier public research and land-grant university members across the United States and its territories. Prior to APLU, he led the higher education civil society track of the U.S.-Indonesia Joint Partnership under U.S. President Obama. Mr. Burrola also served as a civil servant in the U.S. State Department's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs during the Bush and Obama administrations. Today, we also welcome Dr. Dalia Larios, who is joining us virtually. Dr. Larios is a 32-year-old resident doctor at the Harvard Radiation Oncology Program in Boston, Massachusetts, where she currently lives. She came to the United States at the age of 10 with her family and grew up in Mesa, Arizona. Since her arrival, she has successfully completed her education in the United States, from elementary school to her medical degree. And now I'll turn it over to Senator Cornyn to introduce the Honorable Mia Love, who's also joining us virtually.
Mia Love is a former U.S. Representative for Utah's 4th Congressional District, having served from 2014 to 2018. Ms. Love was born in Brooklyn and the daughter of Haitian immigrants. She's long advocated for congressional action on DACA and co-sponsored the Recognizing America's Children Act, H.R. 1468, which would have provided a pathway for DACA recipients to permanently remain in the United States. She's currently the National Outreach Director for the Center for Growth and Opportunity at Utah State University, driving the center's national coalition building efforts on immigration, the environment, and technology and innovation. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cornyn. I'll ask each of the witnesses to please stand and be sworn in. Including our witnesses at home who are on the honor system. Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Let the record show witnesses have replied in the affirmative. And Mr. Burrola, you may begin with your remarks.
Chairman Padilla, Ranking Member Cornyn, and members of the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on Immigration, Citizenship, and Border Safety. I am deeply honored to be with you today and to have the opportunity to describe the immense contributions that international students and undocumented students make to the United States and its public universities. International students help our society thrive, innovate, and generate new businesses and technologies, which improve the lives of all Americans. This starts when international students are still enrolled. They enrich the classroom discussion, they provide college experience for American students to understand global issues and perspectives, and they form long ties with Americans that last much longer than the 4 or 6 or 8 years that they're in university. They also generate huge economic activity in our communities. International students contributed this past year over $30 billion through paying tuition, rent, and living expenses. And after graduation, they continue to contribute to this country through investments that they make in starting businesses here in the United States. For example, nearly a quarter of all billion-dollar startups in this country were founded by international students. Now imagine where we could be, where we would be without these contributions. and imagine where we could be if we made attracting and retaining global talent a centerpiece of our U.S. economic and foreign policy strategy. Unfortunately, we are experiencing a steady decline in both domestic and international students in the United States. Today, there are over 1 million fewer U.S. domestic students enrolled in college than there were just 3 years ago. And at the graduate level, the situation is even worse. The U.S. simply does not produce enough domestic talent to meet the needs of our workforce. International students comprise well over half of all enrolled graduate students in the advanced STEM fields, such as engineering, computer and informational sciences, statistics, economics, mathematics, and applied math. It's critical that we continue to educate and retain the world's brightest minds to maintain our competitive edge, while we also work on inspiring domestic students to advance and study in the advanced STEM fields. But enrolling more international students has proven to be a challenge in the last several years. Today, compared to 5 years ago, international student enrollment has declined by 21%. Now, the pandemic accounts for some of this decline, but even if we look at the period prior to the pandemic, international student enrollment had declined by 7% between 2016 and 2020. This would not be as serious of an issue if other countries also saw similar declines. Instead, other countries have seen double-digit increases in their enrollment of international students over the same period. The United Kingdom increased their international student enrollment by 23%, Australia by 45%, and Canada by 52%. Our losses are others' gains. Unlike the US, these countries have established and implemented successful national strategies to attract international students to their own universities. And while each national strategy will vary, they all contain 5 common components. 1, a streamlined and expedited path for a student visa. 2, a pathway for residency and work permits for those students that want in the advanced STEM fields to stay and contribute to their country. 3, increased number of scholarships for international students to enroll at their universities. Aggressive promotion of their countries as study destinations. And 5th, investments in their own domestic universities to improve the quality of their research and their ability to compete as world-class universities. Now, international students often decide where to study based on the opportunities they have to live and work in the country following graduation. Here is where we also are failing. There simply are not close to enough employment-based green cards to meet our workforce needs. Our ability to attract top talent to work and innovate is directly a function of our post-graduation visa policies. An advanced degree in the STEM fields should be a ticket to a green card, giving certainty to students and employers and fostering a greater environment for innovation. Another important factor for prospective international students is the ease and timeliness of obtaining a student visa. Once again, the US is failing to compete. Australian and Canadian government can process a student visa in 4 to 8 weeks, while it can take months to even over a year just to obtain a student interview at a US consular office abroad. And the US still penalizes prospective students in the visa process if they express an intent to stay in the US after graduation. Our immigration law is the only one we know of that you are welcome to come study, but you can't stay. It is therefore critical that Congress extends dual intent to the international students during the visa application process. By doing so, international students would no longer be denied a student visa merely for expressing an intent to contribute to the US post-graduation. The economic imperative for attracting and retaining international students is clear. When it comes to undocumented students, we have an economic and a moral imperative. Public universities see firsthand the spirit of undocumented students, their drive and determination to build their futures and those of their families and home communities. For many, they were brought to the United States at such an early age they can remember no other country as home. They are Americans in every way except citizenship, and they also contribute to our country. 1/4 of DACA recipients are essential workers, and 30,000 are healthcare workers, including my fellow witness here today. If DACA were to end, the economy would lose 22,000 jobs per month. But despite these contributions, undocumented and DACA recipients remain in an untenable situation. With appropriate action to attract and retain talented international students and protect undocumented students, the U.S. can take giant leaps as well as live up to the values and opportunities that have long made our nation special. I thank the subcommittee for the opportunity to provide testimony and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now turn to Dr. Larios to provide her statement. Dr. Larios, are you there?
Yes. Hi. I would first like to thank Chairman Padilla, Ranking Member Cornyn, and members of the subcommittee for your time and the opportunity to share my story. I am in DC and unfortunately tested positive for COVID this morning and unable to attend in person. My name is Dalia Larios. I'm a doctor completing my residency training in the Harvard Radiation Oncology program in Boston, Massachusetts. I'm also a DACA recipient. At the age of 10, I came to the United States with my family and grew up in Arizona, a state frequently at the center of many immigrant debates. As the eldest and only undocumented child in my family, I worried my parents would be detained by ICE and never come home. I worried I would also be taken away and be separated from my 3 younger siblings. For years, I remained grounded and inspired by my parents. If you look carefully, my father's hands are different. Calluses on his palms and scars on his fingers testify to years of landscape and construction work. There's a grittiness to his handshakes that pay tribute to years of sacrifice. Just as admirable is my mother's resilience. She learned to drive even when told it was not for women, and started her own business cleaning houses with limited English proficiency. Seeing my parents work long hours at multiple jobs to support our family motivated me to focus on things I could control in my life. I concentrated on my classes, finding refuge in my books. Through books, I escaped to places where I felt safe. Growing up, I had often felt as if I had committed a crime. The loss of this country made me feel guilty and insecure. I felt as if there was something tarnished about who I was. In hope of being worthy and accepted, I used school to show that I was grateful, that I wanted to give back. As a teenager, I picked up several jobs to support my education, cleaning houses with my mom and tutoring younger students. I was often asked, Dalia, why do you do this? Even if you go to college and graduate, you will never be able to have a job using your degree. While those words were difficult to hear, I believed, like many other immigrants, in the possibility of something better. Still, the specter of my undocumented status has shadowed every major transition of my life. Despite graduating in the top 1% of my high school class with nearly 700 students, I never knew if I would be able to attend college, let alone afford it. As an undocumented student, I was not eligible for federal or state financial aid. State laws classified me as an international student, which raised tuition and excluded me from most forms of institutional scholarships. Some colleges asked me to provide proof of US citizenship and permanent residency if I wanted to attend classes beyond 1 semester, which again made me question my worth in a system that did not see me. Thankfully, through a community that believed in me and the generosity of private donors, I was able to attend Arizona State University. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in biological sciences and a passion for medicine. Soon after graduation in June 2012, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, was created. Because of DACA, I was able to take a gap year to work and earn money to afford the medical school application process. Once again, I didn't know what schools would consider my application or how I would afford the cost of medical education. Undeterred, I applied to medical school, and after an anxious interview cycle, I became the first DACA recipient accepted to Harvard Medical School. In 2019, I obtained my medical degree and graduated with honors. At the beginning of 2020, I served in intensive care units at the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic. Many times, I was the only doctor who spoke Spanish when most patients were Spanish speaking. As I peered through patient windows, I could not help but feel an extra sense of responsibility to provide the best care possible. And yet, my own future was in question as the US Supreme Court was also set to decide on DACA's future in June of 2020. Although the program was spared, this process highlighted the susceptibility of DACA to political discord. Now, in my specialty training, I care daily for cancer patients undergoing treatment with radiation therapy. Serving them is the honor of my life, which I hope to do for decades to come. However, my future continues to be filled with uncertainty. I worry about where I will work when I am done with medical residency. What states will offer a professional medical license to a DACA recipient? Given the impermanence of DACA, I fear the program will continue to be threatened for years to come, and with it, my livelihood and that of countless other immigrants. For me, the thought of deportation is exceptionally painful to bear. Most days, I don't allow myself to think about it. It would mean losing everything and everyone I know. My siblings are all US citizens, and my parents have also adjusted their status. My mother is now a permanent resident and my father a US citizen. I'm the only person in my family who is undocumented. I would also be separated from my patients who are part of the communities that raised me, the very communities I hope to continue serving as a doctor and researcher. Knowing the threat of deportation is always present, I remind myself of where I find refuge, my family, my books, and now as a doctor, my patients. Some days I think about the 10-year-old who came to this country and wonder, has she done enough? Tomorrow, June 15th, will mark 10 years since DACA came into existence. However imperfect, DACA exemplifies the power of higher education and meaningful community integration. It showcases that the desire to succeed is not sufficient if structural and systemic changes are not implemented to provide inclusion. I could not have become a doctor without the protections of DACA. And hundreds of thousands of immigrants share my story. In the past 2 years, we have seen immigrants play vital roles during a global pandemic, from doctors and researchers to teachers and military officials. I am proud to serve alongside my colleagues in these spaces. I hope that as a country, we work to support policies that acknowledge our full potential and our full humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lados, for sharing your story. And we're sorry to have learned about your COVID diagnosis, but so glad you're able to still participate with us virtually, and happy to extend a rain check to visit the Capitol once you're fully recovered. Our final witness is former Congressmember Love. Ms. Love, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Padilla, Senator Cornyn, and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify today. I am encouraged by the testimony I've heard so far, and really just feel much better about it. I just needed to say this. My name is Nia Love. I am the proud former representative for Utah's 4th Congressional District. I currently serve as the National Outreach Director for the Center for Growth and Opportunity at Utah State University. My story begins with immigration. My parents left their home in Haiti over 48 years ago and came to the United States because this country offered two things they desired more than anything else: freedom and opportunity. With courage, faith, and grit, they showed me that the American dream was possible. I would not be who I am today if they didn't make the brave choice to join this great nation, like so many immigrants before them. I'm here to discuss two of today's most pressing immigration challenges. One, creating an immigration system that meets the needs of US companies so the American workforce can compete on a global scale. Two, creating an orderly and humane system of asylum that lives up to American ideals and freedoms. Both of these serve and deserve congressional attention and policy reform. I'll start by addressing the American workforce. Today, the US economy is missing 5 million workers. There are about 11 million open jobs in the country today, but fewer than 6 million unemployed people. In other words, there are 2 open jobs for every unemployed person in the country. We need people. We need them in every industry at every level. We need more healthcare workers, doctors, nurses, and CNAs. We need manufacturing employees, pilots, and plumbers. We need people to work in our restaurants, on our farms, and in daycares. We need people to work building our homes and our roads. The challenge we face today are straightforward. Employers cannot find enough workers because they simply do not exist as US citizens within our borders. We need to reform our immigration system so that it can stabilize our workforce. Tomorrow, as the chairman and ranking member mentioned, is June 15th and will mark 10 years since the original implementation of the DACA program. Creating a solution for Dreamers has been a policy challenge. The original Dreamers legislation was introduced in 2001. As children brought to the US, Dreamers make a sympathetic case for immigration reform. Consider Liliana Tapia Bolaños. Liliana was brought to Orem, Utah when she was just 3 years old. Because of DACA, she has served a religious mission, started college, worked as an intern advocating for the rights and welfare of children. Though DACA has protected many over the last decade, its origin in the executive branch makes it a prime example of the need for congressional action as a replacement. It is not permanent. It's not stable. The program is now under review in the courts, and if it's ultimately struck down, DACA recipients could lose their work authorizations. Only Congress can give DACA recipients the strong legal footing they need. This will require compromises that marry enforcement with pathway to work authorization and legal status so that we address the underlying reasons why people lived and live in the shadows for many years. When I represented Utah's 4th Congressional District in the House, I partnered with my colleagues to introduce broad, balanced, and bipartisan measures. And I would like to see Congress once again work together to seek true bipartisan compromise in this area. Of course, immigration is a multi-pronged issue. One single change can't fix the entire immigration system. Consider our primary skilled immigration category, H-1B visa. According to research from the Center of Growth and Opportunity, the H-1B visa has been a valuable component of U.S. immigration system since 1990, but its operation has not kept pace with the country's needs. In 2005, 85,000 visas were available. Today, nearly 20 years later, only 85,000 visas are available. There are many promising options for expanding skilled immigration. Research suggests that the expansion of high-skilled immigration will boost economic growth, expand American businesses, and provide more opportunities for the most disadvantaged Americans. The worker shortage is fueling the record high inflation we're experiencing today. The economy is more than rocket scientists, engineers, and artificial intelligence experts. Groceries and everyday necessities arrive on store shelves and in packages on your doorsteps because farmers, ranchers, and retailers work hard to get them there. Today's labor shortage contributes to high prices for food, healthcare, and basic needs. The damage of today's worker shortage are evident across the economy. Opening more avenues for immigrant workers will help tame inflation and encourage economic growth. Finally, if we want to see record apprehensions of migrants along the southern border, we have to do everything we can to fix our borders and open up our immigration policies so that people aren't merely crossing the border without at least having a legal way in. Finally, for Congress, today's immigration challenges present an opportunity to support U.S. businesses and grow our country's wealth. We should stop treating people like liabilities that need to be managed and start treating people like assets that can be developed for the betterment of our country and communities. My parents have always told me that the greatest day of their lives was the day they became U.S. citizens. It was a culmination of years of work. They learned how to speak English, studied American history, and learned about the Constitution. So when the day came for them to finally be naturalized, hold their hands up and swear allegiance to the American flag, they knew exactly what they were saying, and they meant every word of it. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on an issue near and dear to my heart with friends on both sides of the aisle.
Thank you, Ms. Love. Thank you to all of our witnesses once again. We now turn to questions, and I'd like to begin by once again acknowledging that tomorrow marks the 10th anniversary of the creation of DACA. And as we have acknowledged, DACA has allowed thousands of young people to come out of the shadows and gain access to work authorization and driver's licenses. DACA's protections opened up opportunities for these children who had grown up in the United States to pursue paths that previously seemed impossible. So many DACA recipients, like Dr. Larios, now adults in their 20s and 30s, who grew up in the U.S. and have gone on to contribute greatly to their communities. These dreamers are unmistakably American in every way except citizenship. But like Dr. Larios, they live in constant fear and uncertainty about their future. And that's because of Congress's failure 10 years later to provide DACA recipients and dreamers with legal status and a pathway to citizenship. It's well past time for us in the Senate to pass the Dream and Promise Act and to ensure that dreamers like Dr. Larios are able to stay permanently in this country that is their home. Dr. Larios, I'd like to begin by thanking you again for sharing your story with us, and particularly noting that you mentioned that you're the only one in your family, between your parents and your siblings, that is undocumented. Can you tell us what DACA's 10th anniversary means to you and how having DACA has impacted your life specifically in access to higher education?
Yes, thank you very much for the question, Senator Padilla. For me, when I think of the 10th anniversary of DACA, it really reminds us of what is possible when we give undocumented youth the opportunity to truly thrive, to be integrated into their communities, to be able to give back. It has taken a village to allow DACA to continue standing today. Many members of Congress in this room have stood by DACA and have supported the advocacy efforts of undocumented youth across the country. We have had to fight for our lives time and time again, especially when the program has been challenged at state and national levels. And although I am proud that the program continues to stand today, I'm disappointed that even after a decade, our futures are still uncertain and our anxieties around deportation have not been abated. I shared earlier in my testimony that I could not have become a doctor without the protections of DACA, and I stand fully by that statement. Accessing an advanced degree, especially in medicine, requires a work permit. It requires a functional social security number. Medical institutions want to know that when you admit students, they can complete fully their training. And we have to undergo vetting through background checks to work in VA centers and hospitals across the country. We're required to take licensing exams that also require proper documentation. And of course, we have to complete residency. And DACA has made all of these things possible for me, but it is not enough to provide full security. We still need a permanent solution and a path to citizenship.
So thank you, Dr. Larios, and again for not just your story, but your example and your service. Our country needs the best doctors, and we need more. Particularly throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, you've been on the front lines, not just an essential worker, but a frontline essential worker, and I believe you deserve better than to live in fear of losing your status and your protections. I want to turn to a slightly different topic now. During the pandemic, as Mr. Borrell reminded us, international student enrollment in schools has dropped by 21%. But even before the pandemic, we were seeing a decline in students coming here to study. Between 2016 and 2019, the United States saw a 7% decrease in international student enrollment. This decrease cost our economy approximately 65,000 jobs and $11.8 billion. However, during the same time period, Australia saw a 45% increase in student enrollments, and Canada a 52% increase. Mr. Borrell, you testified earlier that when it comes to international students and increasing competition for global talent, our losses are others' gains. Can you explain why international students are choosing to study elsewhere over coming to the U.S., and what can we do to better attract and retain international students?
Thank you, Chairman. There are three factors that international students are mainly looking at when deciding where to go study. The first is obviously the quality of the academic program of the university and the availability of their course of study, particularly in advanced fields. In this area, the U.S. does very well. We know we have some of the best programs and the best universities in the world. But two other factors are also on the minds of international students. One is the ease and expediency of obtaining a student visa. And I really can't underscore enough how much other countries have done to streamline their processes, removing student interviews, for example, and expediting student visas. Again, Australia, Canada can process a student visa in 4 to 8 weeks. We're hearing from universities today that some of our students that were just admitted are getting their first in-person consular interview appointment in November 2023. So that gives you an idea of where you're going to choose where to go to college. And finally, students are also looking at a place where they can stay after graduation to work and contribute to that country. And again, we do not allow our international students a pathway currently to graduate and continue on to work and contribute to the U.S. economy.
Thank you. Senator Cornyn.
I guess it was about 2005 when Thomas Friedman published his book, The World is Flat. And I remember at the time what seemed like a pretty sensible proposition to staple a green card to the graduates of these, particularly the graduates of advanced degrees that we need here in the United States. So, Mr. Barola, you believe that the STEM provisions that you've advocated for should be Congress's priority?
Thank you, Senator. The STEM provisions will that are in the America Competes Act, if reconciled with USICA in a final piece of legislation, really enhance, I think, the general goals of what we're trying to achieve, which is to strengthen our research and our technological endeavors here in the United States and that infrastructure. And we do believe that would help tremendously in our ability to attract, educate, and retain some of the best and brightest.
I think we naturalize about 1 million people a year in the United States, but as you heard me in my opening statement, we tend to be more related to family relationships as opposed to employment or skills-based immigration. That's proven to be a challenge for us in the past, is how to balance those two goals. Dr. Latios, may I ask you a question, please? Obviously, the issue of a pathway to some legal status for DACA recipients is important because we don't know what the Fifth Circuit or the Supreme Court is going to decide. Is that correct?
Correct. Having a pathway to citizenship would really change a lot of things. I know for me personally, it would provide peace of mind to no longer live in fear, to no longer have that constant anxiety of deportation, to really focus on my patients and not worry about who will hire me or what states will be able to provide.
But you will lose your employment authorization if the DACA program ends, correct?
Correct, I would.
And you don't qualify as a dreamer for an employment-based green card or an H-1B visa or a family-based green card either, correct?
Correct. Those are very limited options that I would have.
Perhaps this isn't a fair question, but as between the STEM provisions in the American Competes Act or provide some certainty for DACA recipients, which do you think should be Congress's priority?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question one more time?
Between providing some stability for DACA recipients or providing employment-based green cards for people with advanced degrees, what do you think should be Congress's priority?
In topics like this, I think when it's so complex, it's common to want to pit immigrants against each other and try and figure out who is more deserving of these types of guarantees. I personally don't consider myself more deserving than anyone else, and I really urge for broad protections for everyone to have the same opportunities that I've been able to have thus far to be where I am today, to be able to fulfill my own dreams. And I think that Congress should approach this in a comprehensive manner, thinking about really the fact that lives are at stake here, that this is a topic that extends beyond just a piece of paper, and that it's somebody's livelihood that we're talking about.
Ms. Love, you have some ideas about a DACA compromise. Could you share that with us?
Well, of course, thank you, Senator Cornyn. I agree with everything that is being presented today. However, I have to say, as a daughter of Haitian immigrants, I cannot ignore that last summer, tens of thousands of Haitian people gathered in Del Rio, Texas, at the southern border seeking asylum or just a better life. But because they were from Haiti, a country that was not on the DHS's eligibility list for H-2A or H-2B visas at the time, the crowds were unable to enter the country or claim existing work visas. And let me just explain that these weren't just people that were diseased on the streets. They had to have significant resources, which they were taking advantage of, by the way, to get to where they are today, to even get to the border. We can't ignore what's happening at the border. And I think that this is absolutely a multi-pronged issue. We have to find common ground and legislation that addresses all of these issues so people can have the same opportunities that Dr. Larios has. I'm an admirer of hers. I think that she is a rock star, but she contributes to our society. And the only reason why she was able to contribute is because of DACA, but DACA is not permanent. So we need to make sure that Congress comes together and has legislation that gives stability and a pathway. But we have to include our borders also, because we cannot have the same situation that we had at the border and seeing people give up everything they have for the chance of an American dream just to be turned back. And now they're not eligible if they come back. They lose their eligibility.
Thank you. Next, Senator Durbin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Larios, I almost feel as if we've been friends for a long, long time. It was 4 years ago that I told your story on the floor of the United States Senate. I did that about 125 times with different DACA dreamers to tell what they offered to the United States. I'd like to ask you a question. Worst case scenario, no citizenship. Is there a bar to your actually being licensed and practicing medicine in the state of Massachusetts or in the United States?
Thank you, Senator Durbin, for your question. And I agree. I do feel like we've known each other for some time, as this fight has been certainly a long one. In terms of medical licensing, it definitely varies by state. I will actually be very candid. Prior to yesterday, I did not know what the state of Massachusetts required in terms of full medical licensing, and I called the board. I wanted to make sure I could share that with the hearing. And actually, I spoke with a legal representative of the Board of Registration in Medicine in Massachusetts. And as of now, the state does not require citizenship. It does require a working Social Security number that is provided by the federal government, which I have through DACA. But if DACA were to not exist, that would not be possible. And I would not be able to have a medical license in the state of Massachusetts. And while Massachusetts is a little bit more flexible with these regulations, there are other states where there are citizenship requirements around them. And so certainly it restricts where somebody can be employable. And certainly without DACA, it would make it very, very hard for me to continue to work as a doctor.
So if you realized your dream in terms of medicine and you were at the point where you're seeking licensure, how many years of education beyond high school would you have undertaken?
See, at this point, I actually completed 5 years of medical school because I did an extra year where I focused on research for lung cancer. And my residency training is 5 years total. So together, that's 10 after high school. Oh, sorry, in my college years, of course.
I didn't hear college in there. 14?
So if you add college, yes, 14. Correct.
So if we don't do something to keep DACA in business or to find another solution, you could have 14 years of medical education and a position where in many places you couldn't be licensed to be a doctor. Is that correct?
Correct.
What a waste. And usually, Mr. Chairman, this is our illustration of what a crazy set of laws we have on immigration in America. That a person could have lived here so many years in their lives and done such great things and offer such great promise to our country, and we don't give them any avenue to follow forward from there. I'd like to put in a word for, we have some remarkable people here today, but I'd like to put in a word for those who may not qualify for that category so easily. There are many immigrants who come to this country without a college degree or the likelihood that they'll earn one. We still need them. There's so many jobs in this country that need to be filled, and many of them Americans don't rush to fill. They're hard jobs. We think of the agricultural sector of our economy, the dairy sector of our economy, the hospitality sector of our economy, hard work. And they may never go to college or anything beyond that, but they could be an important part of this country. Now, I say that with some prejudice. I know the story of an immigrant who was brought here at the age of 2 who obviously had no skills to offer, but she did manage to become a pretty inspiring mother to this senator. To close the door and say just college graduates and future oncologists need only apply, I think is to ignore the obvious. We need a good, strong workforce, and that workforce, if it does its job well, is going to raise the next generation of college graduates, as I see it. So I hope that we keep our eyes open in terms of that opportunity. Thank you much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a point of personal privilege. I couldn't agree more. I know the focus of today's hearing is the focus of today's hearing, but as I've learned to be the first United States Senator to not just visit, but work an entire day alongside farm workers. First half of the day, picking parsley, hard work. Second half of the day, picking radish, harder work. And in the dozens and dozens of people that I met in the course of that day, not one born in the United States. And not just talking to the folks working the fields, but the owners of the farm. They're deathly afraid of losing their aging workforce because they cannot, for the life of them, recruit anybody to backfill anybody they lose from their crews. So yes, we need immigrants in all sectors of the economy. Now turn to Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for your time today. We appreciate this. Ms. Love, I want to come to you first and pick up where Senator Cornyn talked with you about immigration and immigration reform, and you have been a member of the House. So talk about how a secure border, that securing that southern border, how is that prioritized or not when there are discussions of comprehensive immigration reform? And when you talk about DACA, do you see this as being a path to citizenship or a path to a legal status?
It can include pathway to citizenship. It can include, it depends on what our economy looks like, and it also depends on what people are actually seeking. One of the things that we never ask is there are people who want to be here and want to work and aren't looking for a citizenship, and there are people that are looking for citizenships. But DACA, no one grew up out of the soil of the United States of America. At some point, we all immigrated here. But when it comes to the border, I have to say that many migrants coming here are seeking better economic opportunities. And they've been exploited by transnational criminal organizations that have sold them on the hope that for a fee, they can achieve their dreams by simply crossing the borders. And we have to be very careful with the language that we send and the message that we're sending to people across the border that would allow these criminal organizations to take advantage of them.
Yes, and I think we see the effects of that language right now. Border Patrol in April had a high of 234,088 apprehensions at that southern border. So indeed, the cartels are running that border, but I think it's important that we look at the issue that is there as we talk about comprehensive immigration reform. Mr. Barola, I'd love to come to you with a question. Hostile foreign governments and the way they're trying to steal our trade secrets, intellectual property theft, To Tennesseans, this is an issue that is mighty important. I'm sure you are familiar with some of the issues that have arisen from research institutions, information being stolen, our creative community, intellectual property theft that is there. Do you see espionage and IP theft by hostile countries as a major problem in international academic exchanges?
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. This is an important topic for research universities. We take this incredibly seriously. It is for this reason that we work regularly and very closely with federal authorities, with the FBI. We have faculty, staff, administrators partake in FBI training so we can identify, understand the risks, and be able to ameliorate those risks.
Do you all have a list of best practices that you recommend for universities so that they are not on the backside always responding, but they're proactive in trying to protect research?
At each of our APLU member meetings that we have, that we bring research universities together, this is a very topic that we discuss. How can we identify and how can we ameliorate these risks? But we really do rely on our partnerships with the FBI to help us understand how both to identify and how to prevent as well.
Well, I think that the issues that we all see with the Chinese Communist Party and some of the problems that have risen from Confucius Institutes and the way they have pushed academic interactions with many of our universities has led to some of those issues at research institutions, and having those best practices in place so that universities would know how to make those protections and have a pathway that allows honest international students and honest exchange and shared partnerships is something. So do you all have that on the table? Are you looking at that? Other than just saying we're working with the FBI, or when something occurs, we take steps to remediate?
Thank you, Senator. We, of course, are looking at ways to ameliorate these issues, but oftentimes they come up not ones that we have seen before, if those are issues. I do want to underscore, though, that despite these issues, we also understand the immense contributions that international students and researchers bring to our own research endeavors and to the contributions for our own innovation and technological endeavors here in the U.S. So we want to be very mindful that we are doing our best to identify and ameliorate these risks while not also cutting off those pipelines.
Absolutely, and I think that's an important point and one that we want to preserve and need to pay close attention to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Also, before turning to Senator Booker, I want to share for public benefit that the fact is the government has effective and powerful tools to help screen and protect against any potential threats posed by students, and the vast majority of international students pose no threats. In fact, it's the subject of a letter from national security experts from both sides of the aisle that was recently distributed to House and Senate leaders. And I will quote from that letter: "Global STEM talent drives American leadership in critical sectors that underpin the defense industrial base from computing to aerospace." And we will submit that letter into the record. Senator Booker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your comments, Mr. Chairman. We are in a crisis in our country because we're in a global competition. We're in a knowledge-based economy. The most valuable natural resource any country has is the genius of its people. And Mr. Barola, in your written testimony, you explained how the United States has seen a massive decline. We're losing out in this competition in terms of students coming to this country in recent years. And this is incredible wealth that helps us to stay competitive. International student enrollment in the U.S. decreased by 7% between 2017 to 2019. Enrollment went up by 23% amongst our competitors in the UK, 43% amongst our competitors in Australia, 52% amongst our competitors in Canada. And they are benefiting from that driving economy. And so can you just spell it out one more time? I mean, this is such a self-inflicted wound. And it's also a turning back on our history about, I can think about everything from our ability to beat the Nazis all the way to the space race on how these achievements of our country have been fueled by having immigration. But can you speak to the negative consequences of this decline and loss of our competitive advantage?
Thank you, Senator Booker. You're exactly correct. The U.S. wrote the book on soft power projection and how to bring the best and brightest minds to our country, which has only benefited us over the last 50, 60, 70 years, especially during the Cold War. Our universities are incredibly and heavily dependent on international students for the advanced STEM fields in particular. Over half of our graduate degree earners in areas like engineering, advanced sciences, mathematics, applied math, quantum computing, AI, are international students that are filling those seats. We do not produce, at the moment, the domestic talent to fill those seats. So if we see a sustained decline in international student enrollment, it will be difficult for our universities to sustain those courses, and that would only have a negative effect on drying up the pipeline of talent for our workforce and our companies.
And for innovation in the future. Obviously, I graduated from Stanford, and you could see the Silicon Valley being defined by America. The future of the internet was defined by America. These new industries are dominating the planet right now, defined by America. And now the other industries, we are losing our pipeline like we had for the explosion of these companies around the time I was coming up in the 80s and 90s. Now, so this is if you see these trends continue, what does it mean for American competitiveness in these new era industries, biotech and more, over the next 5-10 years?
We know from labor statistics estimations that by 2030, there will be about 10 million more jobs needed in the advanced STEM fields. And we are not producing that talent here in the U.S. So every time we lose an international student to a competitor country, that is a student that will go on to contribute to that country's innovation, that country's future businesses, and those research developments that will not be developed here in the U.S. And so, yes, it's a huge impact, not just economically, not just to our university's ability to continue to offer these courses to domestic students, but also to our own national security.
Yeah, I'm a competitor, a fierce competitor. I would talk about my competition in my football days, but I don't want to insult the senator from Texas who thinks he knows something about football colleges. But in terms of America's competitiveness, this is crazy. We are literally tying one hand behind our back if we reverse these trends. Now, I just want to, in the minute that I have remaining, can you help me just debunk a myth? Because I hear this all the time. It's said as if it's fact, but it's such a crazy myth that we often hear opponents of immigration reform talking about, that increasing employment-based immigration will take jobs away from hardworking Americans. And it rests on this idea that there's some kind of finite number of jobs. I know one engineer, for example, can often create adjunct jobs in a significant way, depending on the industry they're in. Companies create jobs, and when companies create jobs, demand for labor goes up. And when companies close, demand for labor goes down. In the case of immigrants, they not only increase the supply of labor, but they also, and I hope you can speak to this, can increase the demand for it. Their salaries and their wages are used to buy groceries, rent apartments, buy goods. It's a multiplier effect of economic activity. And so can you just, maybe in the last seconds I have, can you just tell this committee why falling victim to that myth is really hurting the American economy and making the problem for native-born Americans and the economy for native-born Americans even worse than it would if we were dealing with immigration policy that welcomed in more of these workers?
Thank you, Senator. A highly skilled workforce drives innovation and drives business development. 44% of Fortune 500 companies in this country were founded by immigrants or the children of immigrants, and over 20% of all of our billion-dollar startups were established by international students. So they are creating jobs, they are adding to and enhancing innovation and employment here in the United States, not subtracting. So I agree with your statement.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure the chairman agrees with me that California college football teams are better than Texas college football teams.
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today. Such an important topic. Thank you for holding this hearing, both of you. Mr. Burla, in your written statement, you said that when talented U.S. graduates leave the U.S. after graduation, they represent a self-inflicted economic wound. I couldn't agree more, and it's one of the reasons that I have been leading for a number of years, taking it over from Kent Conrad, the Conrad State 30 and Physician Access Reauthorization Act. I now have 22 bipartisan co-sponsors, including Senator Cornyn, thank you, and Senator Tillis, Senator Collins, Senator Ernst, and many Democrats as well. This legislation would reauthorize and expand the Conrad 30 program that has brought more than 15,000 doctors to underserved areas in the last 15 years from other countries. How do you anticipate that it would help American medical schools to recruit top talent from abroad if it was easier for foreign doctors to stay in the U.S.? And how can reforms like this bill help to increase the number of medical students who choose to serve in underserved communities?
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. We know that our American medical colleges are particularly interested in this effort, but I am not a particular expert on the J visas or M visas. Really, my focus and my expertise is on the F1 student visas. So I feel this is a bit out of my area of expertise, but with your permission,
that doesn't stop anyone on this side of the dais.
I was going to say, with your permission, I would be happy to work with my colleagues to make sure we can get you an answer that addresses your point. But it just falls out of my area of expertise.
Okay. Dr. Larios? Exactly. Dr. Larios, are you there? Okay, she's there. I'll ask the question. Hopefully she can answer. Your story is a reminder of how not having permanent status affects so many aspects of a person's life. From, as you mentioned in your written statement, deciding whether to seek medical care to choosing which educational opportunities to pursue. Can you talk about how having a viable pathway to long-term status would be? We're working with the Afghan refugees right now. Senator Graham and I are, and Senator Coons, on a pathway for them, many of them having served our country so courageously. Could you talk about that in terms of having a permanent status?
Yes. Are you able to hear me?
Yes,
okay?
I can hear you great. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was having a little bit of issues
Don't
from
worry
my
about
side. Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the question, and I'm happy to expand on that. To take it back to my personal experience in discussing this topic, for me, having permanent status, having a path where I can have citizenship, really, as I was starting to kind of reference earlier, would bring peace of mind in a way that really it takes us out of being afraid of having to worry about our safety all the time, of me being able to focus fully on what I have to do in terms of my job and not have to worry about hiring or medical licensing. For me, I would also think about traveling outside of the country for the first time. I have not left the US since I came from Mexico over 20 years ago, maybe presenting research in an international setting. And really what would bring me the most joy is knowing that it wouldn't just be about me, that it would be about other immigrants who are also in this position, from teachers to people who are in the military, to those who serve our meals and work in the fields and in agriculture. Knowing that they can also have peace of mind would be life-changing for all of us. Something to emphasize about a lot of these issues is, at least for DACA, we live 2 years at a time. We apply, we cross our fingers, hold our breath, and hope that there's an acceptance on the other side. But living like this is not a life. You're constantly living in these pauses and hoping that things turn out okay. So a path to citizenship, a permanent solution would change everything.
Very, very well said. Thank you. Thank you for that. Mr. Barula, my state's unemployment is down to 2.5%. It's one of the lowest in the country. We need more immigrants and any status dreamers. I mentioned Afghan refugees, Ukrainian refugees. Comprehensive immigration reform would help us the most. We just don't have enough workers, and we're going to start losing business to foreign competitors. In your view, how can making it easier for foreign students to have a pathway to stay in the U.S. help to make sure that American universities and businesses can continue to recruit top talent?
Thank you, Senator. Let me begin by thanking you for all your efforts on behalf of Afghan refugees. We know that our university worked very closely with you on this issue and really appreciate that. So thank you. In terms of the question of what could we do to ensure that international students have an option of staying here, it is imperative because we, again, as you mentioned, do not have enough talent domestically to fill these workforce needs. And so international students would be a great contributor if they had a pathway to do so. But at the moment, once a student graduates from university, they have 60 days. In that 60 days, they need to either secure an H-1B visa or a green card or otherwise return to their home. And that does not provide a very long time period to secure what we know are very limited amount of options. And so any pathway, especially in fields that we know are critical to our economy and our innovation endeavors, would be critically important for our country.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. I have a couple of additional questions I want to add to the conversation here. Next one is, I think this was part of your background, Mr. Barola. As of 2020, 39% of all undocumented students pursuing graduate degrees have an undergraduate degree in STEM fields. And thousands of DACA recipients work in healthcare roles as teachers and in food and agricultural industries. Now, DACA recipients, we know, pay billions of dollars annually in state and local taxes. And like international students, found businesses at higher rates than their native-born counterparts. So these are young people who are creating jobs and revitalizing communities in the process. Indeed, DACA recipients, like Dr. Larios, have played a critical role as essential workers during the pandemic and in our ongoing economic recovery. That's why I introduced the Citizenship for Essential Workers Act as my first bill in Congress last year to provide essential workers like Dr. Larios who keep us healthy, who keep us fed, who keep us safe during the pandemic with a pathway to citizenship. Now, Dr. Larios, as a physician, do you worry about the impact on patients' medical care if you and other DACA recipients who are working in healthcare lost your ability to live and work legally in the United States?
Yes, absolutely. This is something that I worry about. The AMC, so the Association of American Medical Colleges, published a report in June of 2020 noting that there's a projected shortage of up to 124,000 physicians in the next 12 years. Together with our ongoing pandemic, every member of the healthcare community counts. We need everyone, every doctor, every nurse, every physician assistant, and so on to continue ensuring that our population in the US is taken care for properly. With this said, there are nearly, as was mentioned earlier, 30,000 DACA recipients in healthcare and about 200 medical students and residents who, again, have DACA and would be able to contribute to this, to ensuring that the shortage is a little bit lessened by having more members participate actively and contribute. The AMC has also noted that in their lifetime, if you look at those nearly 200 medical students and residents that have DACA, they will touch the lives of 1.7 to 5.1 million patients. Certainly, this is not a trivial number, and knowing that we have an America that has enough doctors that can care for them is something that I think we can all be on board. And it highlights that everyone matters, and deportation, especially in a time of need, would not make sense. So definitely something I worry about from a numbers perspective. And from the other perspective is from a cultural perspective. We want to show that our healthcare workforce, and really any workforce, represents the people that we're serving, that it is diverse, that it comes from individuals from all aspects of our America. And I think DACA helps do that as well.
Absolutely. Particularly cultural competency in medical care is important for ensuring quality of care.
Correct.
Now, we've also heard today how training and developing and retaining immigrant students here in the United States is imperative to preserving our global competitive edge in technology and innovation and continuing to help our economy recover. However, in order to obtain a visa to come to the United States, international students must typically demonstrate that they are not intending to stay in the United States following graduation. That seems short-sighted for our country if we want to actually compete for global talent. Students who study here and wish to remain must navigate outdated and restrictive immigration policies, including a highly competitive temporary visa lottery and a years or decades-long backlog for employment-based visas. Mr. Barola, I know in your previous answer we touched on this, so I'm asking you to maybe expand and explain why it is difficult for an international student graduate to simply stay and work in the United States after completing their studies, and also how, not just how it impacts the students themselves, but how it impacts the universities and colleges as institutions.
Thank you, Chairman. It's interesting. The U.S. is really the only country that has this immigration law, which does not allow students to stay after they complete their studies. Other countries welcome them to their universities and then continue to welcome them to work and contribute to their economies. We do not do that. As I mentioned, after about 60 days after graduation, students will need to either depart the country, get an H-1B visa or a green card, or they could also use optional practical training, which is one option where they stay as an international student and contribute by an academic process of learning a particular field for a short period of time. But it's still not a pathway to a work permit. And this makes it challenging for our universities to compete with foreign universities that have that option. When a student is looking at where to study, they're looking at how quickly can they get that student visa, how expeditiously can that visa be obtained, and also can they stay and work in the country after they finish their studies.
Thank you very much. Senator Booker for a second round.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate you doing a second round. There's so much to discuss here. Mr. Barola, non-immigrant F-1 visas requirements make higher education really inaccessible to a vast majority of refugees who are not resettled in the United States of America. Globally, only about 5% of college-age refugees in the world are able to access higher education. Given the current international events, it's really clear to me, at least, that we need to address this challenge of refugee students face in their pursuit of higher education as they seek to come to the United States. So could you just maybe inform the committee on your recommendations to make higher ed more accessible to refugee students?
Refugees, especially Afghan and Ukrainian refugees that are here in the U.S. that have escaped violence, persecution, oppression, authoritative regimes, are here and are being resettled by our universities in coordination with community organizations and our government. And our universities are doing quite a good job here in the U.S. of helping provide wraparound services, English language training for students and families, helping them adjust to the culture here in the U.S., legal clinics to understand their rights and laws here in the U.S. And these are ways that we're supportive. We also enroll those students that had their courses interrupted. That might be in Afghanistan at the American University of Afghanistan, for example, right. And allowing them to come here and continue their studies. So anything we can do to provide pathways for those students and scholars whose academic endeavors were interrupted makes it very helpful. But the reality is, much like DACA recipients, refugees are looking for some levels of a foundation of stability before they can even be thinking about investments in their life in terms of college and higher education. So providing a base, a foundation of stability, of knowing what your legal options are within the country are critically important so that they can go ahead and then look at how they can best reach their own full potentials and contribute to the country.
Thank you for that really substantive answer. You also talked about something I found interesting in your written testimony. You cited both a front log of petitions for employment-based visas, meaning petitions that are awaiting initial review, and a backlog of petitions that have been reviewed but not fully processed by U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. If Congress chooses to raise pre-country caps for employment-based visas, allow dual intent or otherwise incentivize more international students and skilled workers to immigrate to the United States, what do we need to do to ensure that USCIS is not further overburdened and that these front logs and backlogs do not continue to grow worse?
Thank you. Yes, the pandemic has had a huge impact on employment and ability for USCIS to be able to address these backlogs and front logs. And so staffing support, not just for USCIS, but many aspects of our federal agencies that have seen losses of employment and workforce are partially what is causing these backlogs. So addressing that would be critically important. But also, I think for our own students, finding ways to expedite. We did this this past December when we allowed, for example, students that had already been to the U.S. on a visa to forego certain processes and visa interviews to be able to come and study in the United States. So ways to expedite within the current framework would be very helpful.
Thank you very much. I want to go really quickly. I may go a few seconds over, but I know the chairman's favorite pastries. I'd like to go to Dalia Larios, if I can, if she can hear me. In your written testimony, you wrote about the uncertainty created by the impermanence of DACA, which honestly I think is cruel because of the anxiety, the insecurity hanging over so many of these folks. And worse, you emphasize how not all states allow DACA recipients to obtain medical license. I thought that testimony was powerful. And how you haven't been able to travel outside of the United States since you arrived here 20 years ago to learn from other oncologists or share your own research, especially in the field of oncology. It is so important now to be putting all of our substantial resources and all of our best minds into researching something as profoundly threatening to the human race as cancer. And I think it's just very succinctly, if you could tell me, how have you seen immigration restrictions in this country hinder the improvement of this critical, vital, urgent medical research that takes place in your field?
Thank you for your question. Certainly the biggest obstacle is coming back down to access. We need people to join the field. We need people to be able to have access to higher education, to be able to work on this vital research and be able to, find those solutions for cancer and other problems that we're facing in other fields. Without those skills and those bright minds, we're really losing opportunities to tap into that potential from so many individuals that could be contributing. We know that this year alone, over 100,000 students in high school graduated that are undocumented. And for the first time ever, this generation will not have access to DACA. They will face bigger barriers than even I faced in terms of accessing federal financial aid, state financial aid, institutional aid, and so on. And really something that I want to underscore in this is that when we think about these policies and these regulations, they really have a way of coming down with great impact on the human body and mind. These students worry about this. They're more likely to face depression, anxiety, even suicidal ideation. And we send this message that their lives don't matter, that their contributions don't matter. Every year that goes by, that we don't offer that path to citizenship or an opportunity to continue forward. So it impacts us as a nation at individual levels with our young and bright students, and at these bigger levels with advancing cancer and advancing our fields, whether, through our STEM fields, to be more competitive.
Because in critical research areas, immigrants to our country have made profound contributions. But then clearly that what you just said at the end there about the human anguish that is caused to dreamers who in themselves bring to our economy billions of dollars, are our first responders, are our teachers, are our medical professionals, and more. This is not only cruel, but it's self-inflicted wounds again. Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to go over time.
Thank you, Senator Booker. I appreciate that colleagues have been coming and going throughout this hearing. And if you're welcome to stay if you have additional questions. I know I have a couple more that I want to make sure we get in as part of the record that we're building here today. The Bureau of Labor Statistics predicts that over the next 8 years, jobs in STEM fields will grow 10.5% to more than 11 million in the United States. Now, filling these jobs will be critical to protecting our supply chains, growing our economy, and keeping the United States at the forefront of technology and innovation. However, there's just enough qualified American STEM graduates to meet our country needs, and by 2030, there will be an estimated 2.5 million STEM job vacancies. Ms. Love, are you still with us? If so, I'd love to.
I am.
Okay,
still here.
wonderful. I want to direct this question to you, given your role and expertise. You said in your written testimony that, quote, we should stop treating people like liabilities that need to be managed and start treating them like assets that can be developed for the betterment of our country and communities, end quote. Why is doing so for students important for the United States to remain at the forefront of technology and innovation?
Well, I have always thought it's ridiculous that we would have students come to our country, learn, and gain the expertise that they have, and then we ship people off to just compete against us. It makes no sense. This is why I emphasize we can't just, I've always been a supporter of doing something for DACA recipients, but we have a multi-pronged issue that we have to face. For instance, we need to emphasize that cross-border migration jeopardizes opportunities to come to the United States legally in the future. And we can't forget that recipients of H-1B visas are waiting in long lines. We are doing not just migrants a disservice, but we're doing a disservice to the American people in all aspects. So I am, again, emphasizing and pleading with Congress to continue to do the work. It's not acceptable for us to remain a country that does not have good immigration policy that reflects our needs and our compassion.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, I agree wholeheartedly, but think it may be helpful for the sake of making progress to recognize that we have to recognize there's different populations. I mean, for all the times I hear something about the southern border, the southern border, the southern border, an individual or a family coming to the southern border of the United States seeking asylum, which is lawful based on federal law and international law, it's a very different group of people than the millions who have been in the United States for years and years and years, working, paying taxes, raising families, raising doctors. We shouldn't have one situation keep us from doing right by the millions of immigrants, both documented and especially undocumented, that deserve better. That it's in our national interest. I want to transition to a different topic. This spring, more than 100,000 undocumented young people will graduate from high school. Yet an overwhelming majority of those graduates are ineligible for DACA because they entered the United States after the DACA required arrival date of June 15th, 2007. So they fit all the other criteria of DACA minus the fact that it's been 10 years since DACA was signed. In fact, DACA recipients or students who are potentially eligible for DACA, as written, now represent less than half of the undocumented college and university student population. Undocumented students are generally barred by federal law from accessing in-state tuition and financial aid, but some states, and I'll give credit to Texas for having been the first, followed soon after by my home state of California, passed laws to make in-state tuition and financial aid available to undocumented students. Other states, however, are doing the opposite by actively preventing undocumented students from even enrolling in public universities. First, Dr. Larios, I know you spoke to this in response to a question from Senator Booker. Just wanted to offer you another minute if you wanted to add or expand on your prior comments.
Yes, thank you, Senator. Yeah, I think that this is such an important really piece of information to focus on, knowing that there's more than 100,000 undocumented young people that will graduate and not really have the ability to continue with their lives in a way. They will be barred from entering the workforce and face more challenges to accessing a college education. And truly, it's a disservice to our country to know that all of this potential can be lost. For me, when I think about the challenges they will face, maybe in some states they won't even be able to access a driver's license to get to class, assuming they even are able to be allowed to study in a home institution and have the ability to pay for tuition. I also think about, again, a lot about the mental health piece too, because all of these laws and all of this inaction comes down with great impunity in the human body. And we're sending a message, right? We're sending a message to them that their contributions are not enough, and that their lives don't matter when we don't change laws and we continue to have them live in limbo. So I think it's time that we help change this message.
Thank you. I'll just also add for the record that many of these undocumented students graduating high school will do so as their school valedictorians. And their valedictorian speeches in graduations just break my heart. Mr. Borrell, I understand, well, we acknowledged a minute ago that there's some states that are actually moving to make it harder for undocumented immigrants to attend college or be eligible for financial aid. Can you describe what the impacts of these changes to the law or proposed changes to the law would be both for students and, again, the universities as institutions?
Thank you, Chairman. We know from the National Conference of State Legislatures that there are 19 states that currently do provide in-state tuition for undocumented students. But that leaves, my math is bad right now, 31, I believe, is the number if I'm doing my math correctly, that would not have those same policies and could potentially right now be passing a legislature that would make it impossible for them to access that in-state tuition. This would be a major barrier. DACA students, undocumented students, it is hard to plan for a future when you don't know if you will be able to graduate to afford a college education, but then to be able to graduate and work and stay in the U.S. That fear of deportation would be there, and it's hard to invest in yourself when you are uncertain of what that future may look like. So it has a huge negative impact on our society by us not being able to take full advantage of the contributions that undocumented students make to this country. But for universities, we have a declining enrollment in domestic student enrollment in this country. We have had 5 consecutive semesters of declining enrollment by U.S. students in our universities. There's capacity. There are seats. We should not be limiting who can achieve and be able to attend those universities and use their talents to the fullest. Thank you.
Thank you. And final subject I want to make sure we get on the record here today, and that's the impact of international students on universities and communities and our economy. International students studying in the United States contribute roughly $41 billion to our economy and support more than 458,000 jobs. About 1 out of every 5 entrepreneurs who have founded a startup in the United States is an immigrant. 1 in 5. And 3/4 of those founders first came to the United States as students, specifically. Immigrant entrepreneurs who have founded a startup in the United States are likely to start their companies in the same state in which they were educated. Clear, direct nexus, particularly where they received their graduate education. The economic impact of international students is very clear, but international students can also enrich the educational experience of U.S. citizens by exposing their fellow students to new perspectives and new ideas. International students, like all immigrants, bring tremendous value to this country. Mr. Borrell, can you just elaborate a bit more on the benefits international students bring to the experience of domestic students in the United States?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Domestic students, Americans, benefit tremendously from international students, both in the short, I shouldn't say both, but in the short, the medium, and the long term. In the short term, they're in classes. They're learning from international students, gaining different perspectives. Those classroom discussions, those discussions in the dormitories at night, all add to the educational experience for domestic students. And international students also are paying full tuition to attend our universities. They are also adding economic activity directly into those cities. They are going to grocery stores, buying groceries. They are renting rooms out from community members that have a spare room in their house. And they are investing and contributing to the local economy by going to restaurants and whatnot. So they bring tremendous immediate economic benefit to the U.S. and the communities. But in the long term, as you mentioned, they are founding companies. They are leading in research. Moderna Pharmaceuticals was started by an international student. They are employing Americans after graduation, and they're helping work with Americans to build our research and our technology.
Thank you very much. I know it's been a long afternoon. I want to thank you for your participation as I begin to move to conclude this hearing. Before I do, though, I want to move to enter a number of statements into the record, including statements from the President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration, the Association of American Universities, the American Council on Education, the Department for Professional Employees, AFL-CIO, Forward.us, NAFSA, Association of International Educators, the San Francisco State University, Improve the Dream, and United Auto Workers Local 5810 and Local 2865. Without objection, these statements will be included, and we will close the record 1 week from today. So as I do begin to bring this hearing to a closure, I want to thank my fellow subcommittee members and especially our witnesses for joining us today. In this time of global economic uncertainty, the United States cannot afford to fall behind. Immigration and higher education are essential engines for economic growth. We heard from Mr. Barola that almost half of the Fortune 500 companies in the U.S. were founded by immigrants or children of immigrants. Immigrants represent more than 1/3 of our nation's Nobel Prize winners, including all 3 of last year's winners. And DACA recipients include valedictorians and Rhodes Scholars and more. Like Dr. Larios, they're doctors, teachers, mothers, and fathers who are home in America and contributing greatly to our country. Higher education plays a critical role in attracting and unlocking the talent of immigrant students. Immigrants make up about 1/5 of all startup founders who have attracted venture capital in the last 30 years. Most of those entrepreneurs came to this country through student visas to earn a college or a graduate degree. And international students and students with DACA all frequently start companies in the same state where they went to school, bringing economic benefits to the entire community. The evidence is clear. We should be eager to welcome immigrant students and make it easier for them to access higher education. And we should listen to the economists and business leaders who are sounding the alarm on our labor shortage today and on our decline in the population growth rate. But instead of maintaining our edge, it seems like we risk falling behind. Filling STEM jobs in particular is critical to maintaining our supply chains, growing our economy, and protecting our national security. But at the current rate, we risk losing our leadership position at the forefront of technology and innovation. We cannot afford to let our colleges and universities fall behind in the global competition for talent. Our losses would be other countries' gains. So it's time to pass critically needed reforms to attract and retain more international students. And it is time to pass permanent protections for dreamers, ensuring that they have lawful status and a pathway to citizenship that they have earned. Congressional inaction is threatening to push DACA recipients like Dr. Larios out of the workforce and back into the shadows. A majority of undocumented students graduating from high school today aren't even eligible to benefit from DACA and follow her path. As we mark the 10th anniversary of DACA tomorrow, and as we work to restore our economy, Congress must act. So let's follow the evidence that we heard today and pass long overdue laws to attract and retain immigrant students. Our country and our economy clearly depend on it. And with that, thank you all again for your participation today. This hearing is adjourned.